Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Hit and Hustle. My name is Greg Flammang, and here I am with Jamie Uyeyama, aka Jamie University, the Yama. My man, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Man. I'm excited.
Are you ready? Are you ready for the Kenny Pickett experience? Tell me. Tell me how you feel about it.
You know what? I'm gonna roll with it. I gotta be honest. I wasn't a huge Kenny Pickett guy at Pitt. I said this on Power. I wasn't a big Kenny Pickett guy. But admittedly, I know he had a great last season,
Yeah.
and I mean, boosted by having Jordan Addison, obviously. But I think the previous years, because I had watched him, because they had obviously he was a starting quarterback for Pitt 2 other previous years when they played Notre Dame, and I got to be honest, I didn't like him. He's a guy that I actually watched in high school. When he was at the Army at that time, the Army All American Combine in San Antonio. And he was fine there, and I think at that time he was like kind of like a Temple level guy. Like he
Yeah.
eventually committed to Temple, and then he flipped to Pitt later on. And I just thought, and probably is a little bit of the offense and the kind of talent he was playing with, but I was like, because he went by on his huddle, it was Kenny Football, right? Because he was trying to be like Johnny Football. That was right around that time,
I don't know.
and I just was like, he's like Kenny Checkdown. He just never pushed the ball down the field. He never pushed the ball down the field, and I was like, I mean, even though he did some things athletically,
Yeah.
that I liked, I just was not a big fan of him. I thought he was just kind of average. And then obviously he had a monster senior season. I got to admit, like Pitt was not on Notre Dame's schedule. So, I mean, I saw highlights, but I can't say I really watched any of their games to really say that. I mean, I saw like his fake slide and all that, but I don't know. I will see what happens.
Which is bougie. I mean, a lot of people liked it, but to me, it's like, nah, bro. Like, don't do that.
I didn't like it.
Don't do that.
I mean, I think whatever.
Whatever.
We're both defensive guys, so it's like I'm like, come on, like,
Well, like
you
guys
deserve to
can
get cracked
you
next
get
time.
kicked out of games. Like, like defenders can get kicked out of games for, that stuff. And it's like that's the kind of thing that like you don't know if a guy's gonna slide or not. They slide last minute,
And then a guy
then they
does
kick it in
slide,
the
and then the
face.
guy gets his head taken
You
off,
take
and
take it in the
then
face, and it's like, oh, you're kicked out of the game.
I'm 100% agree with you. Yeah.
It's not cool. So that's Jamie's draft. Was there anyone else on the Steelers that you were very excited about?
I mean, I like the two receivers they got, Calvin Austin from Memphis.
The Ravens wanted him apparently.
Speed, yeah, so that was a big speed guy that I think they can use, and with some of the stuff that Matt Canada does with some of the jet sweep stuff, I think he can be pretty good. And I like George Pickens too. I think George Pickens is the kind of guy that if he was healthy last year, he might have been a first round pick, right? Like he's got that kind of talent. So, I think I like where they're at, especially because they lost Juju and Washington, so they had to kind of replace those guys. And I don't think that the Steelers are going to be. I think they're going to be right around where they were last year. They still don't have the offensive line; still isn't good enough, and I think that even though Big Ben was horrific, really the last 3 years, really. So I actually think that Kenny Pickett or Trubisky could be an upgrade. So they could be better there, but I just still think they're missing some stuff on defense, I think.
Yeah. Well, the Steelers are a well-run organization.
Very well run, yeah.
And speaking of well-run organizations, Kyle Hamilton drafted number 14 to the Baltimore Ravens, and a lot of people, so it's like the fall of Kyle Hamilton, which is kind of weird to me. Like he fell according to mock drafts, which are made up by people who. Like they're not official.
Oh no, they're just guessing.
Yeah, like you have no idea. So a lot of people thought he'd be top 5. Ran a slower 40. Ended up at 14 to the Ravens, and so I was talking to Kyle Hamilton's dad, Derek. He asked me what I thought of it, and the last couple weeks he was getting mocked to like the Redskins, or not the Redskins, excuse me, to Washington. The what are they, Commanders now?
Commanders, yeah.
Commanders, yeah. He was getting mocked to them, and
number 12, yeah.
Yeah, or number 11. And
11, yeah.
I
Sorry.
didn't like that because I don't like, that's a terrible organization. And
Yeah.
I don't like, and Dan Snyder is the worst. Like is an awful person. So I didn't want him going there. The only thing was, it's like he'd be following the footsteps of Sean Taylor.
Yeah, that would have been a cool story. But
that
other than that, I agree. It's 100. It would have been terrible in every other way.
Right. And so like and look, there were a lot of like poor organizations, obviously, in the top 10, right? So like you have Jacksonville, which is not good. The Lions have been a joke forever. Houston is a mess. The Jets and Giants, like I wouldn't have minded them, frankly, but they've had problems, and they're not going to be good for, a couple years at least. And obviously the Falcons are a mess. Seahawks are going through something. They're like, Drew Lock is going to be their guy. So you end up, once you get to the teens, then it's like, okay, like let's get to a good spot. And you go to Baltimore, who like everyone expects will at least be a playoff team next year, could be an AFC title game next year. One of the favorites to win the North. I hate to say that if Matt's listening, like not to hurt your feelings or anything, but like Lamar Jackson was out a lot of last year. Like last year was really weird for them. Now you draft Kyle Hamilton. They're already like they got Marcus Williams, who came over from the Saints. He's going to play one safety spot. Kyle can play the other safety spot. It's going to be a really good fit. Real good team, good organization. Everyone's fired up. So I was happy about it. And it was great to see like their family and all of Notre Dame, and Marcus Freeman was there and everything, and it was just good to see everybody just there and having a good time, and it all kind of it was a good culmination, because I know that they were like sweating the last like 4 or 5 months of just like having to wait and all those other things. So I'm just glad it was over for them. Kyle got through it healthy, and he ended up.
I think from like a Notre Dame fan perspective too, I would say like people want obviously Notre Dame guys to have great careers. Like what's happening with like Zach Martin and Quentin Nelson, and Ronnie Stanley before he got injured, right? Is like you go to like a stable organization, and you get a chance to be like the best version of yourself as a player. And I mean, if Kyle Hamilton is going to be like a Hall of Fame level player, it's set up for him,
right.
in a place like Baltimore, right? So even though like I hate the Ravens, and I mean I gladly hope they lose, but I hope him and Ronnie Stanley both continue to have great careers and just play well in every game except for against the Steelers.
Yeah, Matt is continuing to text. I'm ignoring his text messages, but he get in the chat, Matt. If you want to yell at me about my Bengals slander, that's fine. Get in the chat, because look, this is like a rival pod now. Like, because Matt is Bengals, this is like AFC North, like rival pod. Okay, You're Steelers, Matt's Bengals. I'm Ravens now, lifelong fan since April 28th.
And we all hate the Browns. So
everyone hates the Browns. So it's all a good time. All right. Transition. Let's go to Notre Dame football here. So we today are going to talk about the Notre Dame football offseason and kind of how I guess we could grade it, right? We could grade what we think the offense, the offseason has gone, or how it's gone. And we'll look at the kind of some different Craig and Jamie need tough questions today. Just the different aspects of the program and how we think Marcus Freeman has done, in his first kind of full 5 months of being the head coach at Notre Dame. So I guess we can start off with recruiting. Let's just start off with like what everyone will probably feel is like a home run, going great, A grade. All right, so let's start off with recruiting. As we sit right now, Notre Dame has the number 1 class overall per the 247 Sports Composite. And look, everyone says it's early and that sort of thing. It's not that early. And here's the other thing. Not only is it not that early, but Notre Dame still has on the board who people feel good about them landing. 5-star Dante Moore, top 100 Charles Degusa, top 100 Monroe Freeling, borderline top 100 Jaden Greathouse, in a good spot with about 120, like 120th ranked Rodney Gallagher. They're still in there with Caleb Downs. So it's like, look, who's a 5-star player. So not only are they
Jason
number one
Moore
right now, Jason Moore, who's a top 50 player, Devin Houston, 4-star, who's committing to someone tomorrow. Notre Dame feels really good about that situation. There's so many guys. Like so Notre Dame is up there now, and they've still got. It's not like they emptied their clip or anything like that. They have got a lot of guys still to come who could boost their ranking even more. So tell me, Jamie, about how you assess the recruiting operation so far and where it can go going into the summer.
I mean, you'd have to say that it's been like kind of lights out, like in terms of what they've done. They, like you said, they need to kind of finish where they're at in the summer. I think the official visits are going to be huge coming up. But so if you just look at everything that has happened since Marcus Freeman took over as coach, every single kid they've landed is a blue chip. Every single kid they've landed. They've added.
Define blue chip for everybody.
4 or 5 stars kid, right?
Okay.
So, like 100% blue chip rate, like everybody they did. So, that goes for like, obviously they've added a 2024 kid as well, Brandon Davis Swain, right?
Yeah.
And they're going to add more this summer. Just wait, guys. Like they're going to add more studs this summer for 2024. It's just going to happen. So they're going to get off to a great start there. And you just know that like you sign more of these guys, they're the guys most likely to become NFL guys, to become like standout elite college football players. You're going to get some other guys like Notre Dame obviously has had, the Julian Loves, the Jeremiah Wosu-Koromoas, guys who were composite 3-star guys who ended up being All-American, awesome players, right?
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, you don't want to be signing. You want to be signing more 4 and 5 stars, and I think it's if you said like 70% is like kind of like a good cutoff, like where you'd want to be like to compete with like the top teams. Well, they're at 100%, so that's pretty outstanding.
100% is good.
100% is good.
We'll count that as good.
So, and I mean, are they going to finish 100? They're going to sign all? No, they're not. But it's going to be like over 80%. And that's what it was in the previous class too, that they finished up with, right? I think it was like 81% or whatever it was. So that's level of things. And now obviously, you want to sign more 5 stars. You want to get all that. But that level of blue chip rate, which Bud Elliott was the guy who created that previously at the SB Nation. He's at 24/7 now. That is the level that Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, like those 3 teams are kind of like above everyone else. It's like 77% and up in terms of their guys that they've signed over a 4-year period. And that's just kind of what you got to do to compete with those teams. So I don't know how any other way to say that they're doing an amazing job, and I don't think it's going to stop. I think they're just going to keep rolling with it.
Right. So that we've seen a bunch of 2024 offers go out, especially the last couple of weeks. So they're kind of making that transition over to, not the next, the current recruiting class, but the one after that. I mean, we're talking about, because you're saying, okay, blue chip, right? So 4 and 5 star recruits. Well, there's a difference between, at least to me, right? I mean, think of the NFL draft, right? Like everyone.
There's a difference between a guy saying a guy got picked in the 7th round and a guy got picked in the 2nd round. It's a big difference,
right? Like you're talking about round, but like everyone wants to get drafted, which is like the first 100 picks, right? First 100 picks, like those are the kind of the premium guys, right? Well, I mean, obviously there's the first rounders, right? And then the second rounders and then the third rounders. Well, Notre Dame, we're talking about, 7, 8, 9, possible like 10 players in the top 100 in this class. Notre Dame's had, 2, 3, right? 2 or 3 a year, maybe 4. Okay. And that's been kind of the norm, right? And now we're talking about maybe 2 or 3 5-star players. When you talk about, Keon Keeley and Dante Moore, premium positions, by the way, like edge rusher and quarterback. Like look at the first 2 picks in the
Those
draft.
are the guys who go top 10 and top 15 in the draft. And as much as you say, like, whatever, it's obviously great to have a guy who's an elite player at his position, like a Michael Mayer. I mean, there's usually like one tight end a year that goes off in the first round. And like a lot of the times that guy's not going top 15, so because it's not valued at the same, just like the reason why Kyle Hamilton, even though it's pretty much consensus, people had him as like a top 5 to 10 player in the draft. The reason he doesn't go there is because he plays a position that isn't considered a premium position by NFL teams. Right. Or else he's probably like the second or third guy off the board. Right. Like, and that's why Trayvon Walker gets like projected up, because even though he doesn't have the production. Right. So it's just the way it's viewed. It's just the way it's viewed. Right. So yeah, like it's really hard to get like elite guys. So like Notre Dame has signed one or two out of the entire time since 2015. They've signed 2 top 100 receivers, Kevin Austin and Jordan Johnson, right? And obviously Jordan Johnson didn't work out. But like Braylon James, they just added it. They have a chance to other guys. Like you said, Greathouse could be another guy. Gallagher, in my opinion, is going to be a top 100 guy. Like if he's not, and should be. So like kind of like how JD Price was very underrated. Like they're bringing in guys. They're recruiting higher at positions that they haven't recruited as high at before. And I mean, that matters. It matters.
All right. So I want to, because what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how this can continue, right? So far they're at an A grade, right? How do they stay at like an A or A plus, right? And we'll bring up the question by Alaskan, which is Mike Frank talks about real NIL money coming out at the end. Do you guys feel confident in Notre Dame closing on a blue chip class? So I know that I've had side conversations about this before. Just like when you're in on Keon Keeley and Dante Moore and players of that caliber, let's say Samuel Mpemba, right? Samuel Mpemba loves Notre Dame, loves everything about that. Also interested in Miami, and Miami has a billionaire lawyer who's upfront about paying boatloads of money to players just to come play, right? So he's upfront about it. It's no big secret. So do you feel like the NIL money at the end will cost Notre Dame players? I mean, like, guys that are either, considering committing or have already committed.
I think most of those guys are already out on Notre Dame. You know what I mean? Like, I think those guys that are really prioritize that's like, those aren't the guys that want to have the Notre Dame experience. So that would be my argument against that. So for like the guys that Notre Dame is after, like, and the other thing is like, I don't believe for 1 second that, like, obviously there's all this stuff going on with the NCAA trying to or this talk about them retroactively punishing these teams. And I don't know how that's going to go down, but I know when the dust settles with NIL, to think that Notre Dame and the people, the rich dudes who are definitely willing to like pay $10,000 to go to a friggin' fantasy camp to put on a Notre Dame uniform. You think some of these dudes who go to this camp aren't going to give money if they think it'll help Notre Dame win? You're crazy. Those people will pay if that's what is needed. And there's going to be some people who are like, I don't want to do that, whatever. And there's some people who do. And that's just how it always is. And you know what? And so it's or Notre Dame, like, man, they're not going to do. I'm always worried about Notre Dame and like, yeah, that, the transfers, it's going to make it so hard. They're not going to let these transfers in. They will bend for the transfers 100%. Just like they bended
for Brandon Joseph.
They bended for high school kids.
Yeah.
Those kids don't have to have nearly the same amount of requirements to get into Notre Dame that a football player or athletes in general don't have to have nearly the same kind of requirements to get in to Notre Dame that a typical student does. So that's already there. They weren't going to do early enrollees. Now all of a sudden you're getting double-digit early enrollees before. Believe me, any kind of thing that you think that Notre Dame won't do, man, they're never going to do some guy who reclassifies. If it helps them win, if they know they need it, and the kid actually will fit, they think that this kid is worth it, and they'll be a good enough student, etc. Like they're a fit for Notre Dame, they will bend, and they'll eventually. It's just going to happen. It's just eventuality.
If Keon Keeley wanted to reclassify, they would do it.
Yes,
they would make it happen.
100%. They would find a way.
Yeah. So I'm not sure about, I don't know how confident, like, it's an interesting question, like closing on a blue chip class. Like, here's the thing. Like, I think Keon Keeley already been offered the bag, right? So like, he's already been offered. Dante Moore is currently being offered the bag, right? We don't know how that's going to play out. So maybe that'll be a good test case, right? Like that'll kind of show, right? If Dante Moore ends up in the class, then maybe it's not as big a deal as we think it is, right? But so I don't know if it'll matter for currently or committed players, like players that end up committing. It might cost them players who end up committing somewhere else, like guys who are dragging it out longer.
Yeah,
it might cost them that. But honestly, those types of players, just players who are dragging it out, just generally speaking, without NIL at all, the reason that usually doesn't end up well for Notre Dame and hasn't in the past is because if you're not sold on Notre Dame by like November, December, January, and that sort of thing, then you're usually not sold on Notre Dame, like, period.
Yeah.
So
which is why Notre Dame gets a lot of early commitments,
right,
and all that, and they have most of the guys in the class. And could Notre Dame lose one or two guys late in the process? Maybe. Could happen. Yeah. Could happen, because they might have other influence. They might have other people, like family, who's saying, we got to take this money, or we got to do this, whatever. That could happen. But also, I just think that most of the guys who pick Notre Dame, that they're going to be already eliminated and off the board. They're taking themselves off the board because, like, it's because their value something else already, and that's just how it is with those guys. So, and honestly, because if that was the case, there'd just be a million people. They would all just go to these certain schools, and that's it. But that doesn't happen. And not everyone is getting, no matter what people think about NIL, not everyone is getting like the bag, right? Like, right. There's different levels of guys. So, I mean, I don't think, put it this way, I don't think Notre Dame is going to end up with the number one class. I don't think they were going to ever end up with the number one class.
Right.
I doubt it. But, and maybe in that sense, Notre Dame, I think for Notre Dame to get to a level where they're at a number one class, and regardless of NIL, whatever, I think that's a couple years down the road. Like, they have to kind of like establish, not just win some titles, but get these guys and like start building up, and then you just get it, because you don't just go from like, mid, or not mid, but like, top 15 to number one. Like, it just, you don't do that, because that's not how Notre Dame is recruited. And they don't attract the same guys. They don't have the same track record. So it's like, win natties, put more guys in the league, do this, that, all that kind of stuff. That adds into it, and it's why Ohio State can just do whatever they pick and choose.
Yeah,
right. That's just how it is.
Yeah. All right, I wanted to bring up this comment from John Murray. I'm more concerned about with players fit in the class and how much the coaches want him than his star rankings. Your thoughts? So I would say that we've seen this concept play out on the offensive line because they are after guys like Charles Jagusa, who's a top 100 player, and Monroe Freeling, who's a top 100 player. But then they've also moved hard on Sam Pendleton, who is a low 4-star player. They've moved hard on Sullivan Absher, who was a 3-star. He's bumped up a little bit. Now he's a low 4-star player, and they're hard after Elijah Page, who is an offensive tackle 3-star from Arizona. They don't have to like those. Those are guys who Jamie says Sam Pendleton is an underrated player. He's excited about him as a player. Same thing with Sullivan Absher. A lot of people feel good about Elijah Page and his upside.
I really like Elijah Page.
But that is a perfect example of Notre Dame kind of throwing out the rankings and saying we like these guys as prospects, and this is who we're going to go after, and this is who we're going to prioritize. Notre Dame can, they can push for just the rankings guys if they want, but these like Notre Dame and their offensive line tradition and Harry Hiestand and all that stuff, they are pushing for, what we would consider to be lower rated prospects. They will be on the lower end of this class, but they're not worried about it. They're looking for the fit. So that's what I would say. Like we've seen that play out with Preston Zinter, same thing, right? Like he's not a highly rated.
There are other guys that
Viper guy
that they would have, could have landed probably some higher ranked guys than him.
In this class, right?
Yeah.
The one that just came, they turned down top 150 Sebastian Cheeks. They could have, if they wanted to, they could have said Nolan Ziegler, like, no thanks, but they didn't do that, right? So we've kind of seen like fit matters to them, definitely.
Well, I think too, like, and I think apologies, John, if this is not what you're talking about, but I assumed, and I'm always thinking about fit, and not just with the evals, but I was thinking of like most people think fit at Notre Dame, like the culture of the school, it's different, right? It's different. The culture of the school, the culture of the program, it's different than a lot of other places, right? And I think that kind of stuff does matter. For sure it matters, right? But I mean, what I'll say to that is, one, I think one of the things was Brian Kelly kind of got like a lot of pats on the back for being like, man, they really did a good job of getting these guys who fit, completely ignoring like some of like the issues, some of the guys, like the legal trouble some of the guys got in, some of the guys who got ran off, like a Kevin Stepherson or whatever, right? Like you kind of ignore that and look at whatever the greater part of it. But I think, one of these, or like the quote unquote Notre Dame kid, right?
Yeah.
And, and everyone wants the Notre Dame kid. And I think that kind of thing matters. But I think like when you look at it, so like Keon Keeley, who's a 5-star, right? But was not a 5-star when he originally committed to Notre Dame. But the reason why he fit, he was a guy who committed to Notre Dame is because of the fit and how like that the values and stuff kind of fit him, right? So I think when you look at it from that perspective, and you look at a guy like, say, Jalen Sneed, who was a 5-star as well in the previous class, like I don't know if like Jalen Sneed being a guy from South Carolina, if that was a guy that maybe they would have gone for and think, like, I don't know if this guy's going to be a fit because of like the high school or the region or whatever, right? And you have to realize that there's more Notre Dame fits out there, and you have to work harder to find them. And I think that's what the staff has done, and what they're trying to do is try to find and investigate whether or not this guy's a fit. And sometimes there's guys who are not, like, whatever, we don't need to mention any names, but there was like a transfer receiver that people were like, well, what about this guy? Not a fit, right? Like that happens. And so I think you got to be conscious of that, of you don't want to put someone who's here. I don't think Notre Dame's ever going to be football factory. That's never that's never going to be the identity of Notre Dame. So you have to have people who actually want to be students, like a student athlete. That is like a prerequisite for Notre Dame. At the same time, there's some guys that are like, man, I don't know if like, or maybe they get scared off by like the challenges of Notre Dame, and you got to like convince these guys, like, no, you can do it. Like you are a fit here. And that's what I think is they've done more of. And I think it's necessary, because if you just played it safe and just say, we're only going to recruit these high schools, or only guys from this area of the country, or only these private schools in Atlanta when we go into Georgia, we're only going to do this. When you do that, and you might not find a kid who all of a sudden, I don't know about you, Greg, but whenever I watch a game, when it's like an SEC game on or CBS or whatever, and they're always do like the academic guys of the game, and they always do both teams. And I'm always like, this guy's getting a 3.8 and he's engineering. I'm like, that dude's an All-American. And I'm like, why did Notre Dame not get a visit from this guy, right?
Yeah.
And maybe it's because the guy wanted to stay in the South, whatever, right? But maybe it's just because Notre Dame didn't even try, because they didn't think they had a chance, or they didn't think he was going to be a fit because he went to the different high school. So, and if that's the case, that's lazy, and that's not good enough. And I don't think that's what Marcus Freeman and the staff is. They're not settling for that. And I think it's important. Sorry, that's a like rant over, but I just really think that like that is the main thing. You got to find guys that are fits, but there are more guys that are fits that aren't fits.
The Uyeyama rant. That's what everybody wants. The Uyeyama rant. Okay. What a follow-up question? Do you know anything about this? Do you know anything about this that's reportable?
No, I never heard anything about it. I mean, I have no idea if that's what Justyn Rhett is looking for, or if that was like a thing. But I think most people, when Justyn Rhett decided to do, he had already committed to Notre Dame. Then he was like, he's going to do some video show about his recruitment. And I was like, bro, you're already committed.
Yeah.
So it's like, as soon as he did that, you're like, okay, that maybe is a little questionable.
Yeah.
And then also too, like, it's something that I wrote about for Irish Sports Daily, that there are guys that you're like, okay, you can take visits, and that's, we're still gonna fight for you, whatever. Don't worry, that's fine. You can take your visits. We want you to take the visits, whatever. And then the other guys are like, you're not quite on that level. So if you take this visit, that scholarship's not going to be there. It's just, there's different rules for different guys.
Every recruitment is different too. And like, look, I think the biggest thing is honesty. I think if everyone is being upfront, and I don't know if Justyn Rhett was dishonest or whatever. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is every recruitment, the coaches and the recruit have an understanding of what is acceptable and what isn't, right? No matter what it is. So if it's different for Keon Keeley, and if it's different for Justyn Rhett, whatever it is, if they have an understanding and the understanding is broken, then that's a breach in trust. And then that leads to, outcomes. Right. Yeah. And so, that's how I kind of view these things. I'm going to go to this question, and then we'll move on to more like general team thoughts, because I want to hear your thoughts about what the spring game was. But which recruiter on staff do you trust the most when they get excited about it, under the radar recruit, and under evaluating them different in the consensus or your own eval?
Wow, man, that's a great question. I mean, I think you'd have to say Harry Hiestand.
Yeah.
I mean, the guy's he's picked some winners over the years and has absolutely developed them. I would probably say Harry Hiestand. Some of the other guys, it's tough to say because they haven't been on the staff long enough. So I can't say man, Chris O'Leary, he hasn't worked long enough to say he's offered these guys that whatever. And then a lot of other guys are new. So I can't Al Washington obviously has a tremendous reputation as a recruiter and a great recruiter. And I think he's been a pretty decent evaluator, but I haven't seen enough, I haven't followed enough of guys that he offered, when he was at Ohio State or Michigan or Cincinnati before. I never fall that to the point that I knew that like, oh yeah, this was like where they're at. I mean, I will say that I think previously, like Clark Lee, like I think the guy's a pretty good evaluator at linebacker.
Yeah.
Like I think you look at Maris Leofau, right? You look at Jack Kaiser, and I think those are two pretty good players, and they're both 3-star kids that he kind of like, you know, you would say went on a
He
limb
loved
on.
Jack Kaiser.
Yeah.
I mean, that is an incredible take. I mean, just like small division Indiana football player, and he's like
and
on track to be like a captain.
Well,
He's
and
a
I
really
think
good
it's
player.
the kind of thing where if you, I think when I look at that time, you look at a guy like Jack Kaiser, he probably would have ended up at like Iowa or something. And
yeah.
And then all of a sudden you're like, he's a Big Ten, all Big Ten guy or something by the end of his career. And you're thinking like, well, why didn't Notre Dame offer
from
him,
Indiana?
right?
What's going on?
Yeah, right. And same thing with Maris is that what I wrote about when he committed, I was like, this is the kind of kid that commits to Utah. And you're like, yeah, all of a sudden this guy's like the best linebacker in the Pac-12. Like that's the kind of thing. And you have to obviously have trust in your evaluations. But I think that kind of thing, it matters. One thing I'll say, you could say with a guy like Mike Mickens, and you know, you look at kind of like where he obviously took over at a time where it was kind of like late in the process when whatever. So it's tough to grade him on all of his Notre Dame stuff. Although Jaden Mickey looks pretty darn good so far. Right? Yeah, that looks like a pretty darn good eval. But I would say, like, look at the success of the guys from Cincinnati, and those are guys that he recruited and evaluated. I mean, it's pretty darn good. So
I just answer this question. I would say Cincinnati, man. Like they just had like what 8 guys drafted or 9 guys or whatever it was.
They had 6 guys in the top 109, which is like unprecedented for a group of 5 school. So right there. I mean, that's a thing that I think right there. I think they're on obviously like I wouldn't have. I don't know if you would have said Cincinnati a couple years or a few years ago, but now you'd say it obviously with that track record. Like to put that into perspective, like the 2015 team, which I think arguably the top individual talent that Notre Dame has had on a Brian Kelly team was that 2015 team. You know, depth wise, there had a lot of holes and whatever, but the top guys in that team were as good as anybody in college football. And they had 7 guys in like the top, like 100 or whatever it was. So that's kind of like where Cincinnati's at, and Cincinnati's not Notre Dame. So to be able to do that, and I listed it on Twitter, it was like, these guys were ranked in the thousands. You know, they weren't like, other than Jerome Ford, who was a transfer from Alabama. Right. You get a lot of that. So, I mean, certainly Cincinnati, I always think that like, App State, I think does a really good job of like finding guys. If you look at your like, oh, some guy who kind of like blew up late, a lot of those guys have App State offers. A lot of it. They do a good job of like kind of getting in early. I would say previously when he was at, Western Michigan and now Minnesota. And I think you look at Minnesota, what they do, PJ Fleck, that staff, they do a really good job of evaluation. And so they had like a bunch of guys too, that you would end up being like NFL guys or really, really good college football players that weren't highly rated guys. So, those guys stand out. I look at, to me, like group of 5 schools, I think it's harder. I mean, because obviously you're not going to get a lot of guys like Cincinnati, but to me, there's a lot of schools that are kind of like in like lower Power 5 schools that like Notre Dame wouldn't normally recruit against, that you can find like certain staffs do a good job of like it's weird because Georgia Tech obviously has sucked the last few years, but like Jeff Collins is a good evaluator of talent. Like they just haven't landed the right guys or whatever, but they get in early on guys like that. That's like, if you look and you're like, oh, this guy's got a Georgia Tech offer. Like most of those guys have the kind of traits that you're looking for.
Yeah. All right. So let's make a transition to the team itself. And so I wanted to kind of talk about the spring game and how. All right, let's look at this from like let's try to forget the recruiting stuff and try to just look at what we saw of the team based on the practice that you went to, the I think the three other open practices, or not the three other, but the three kind of viewings with five periods, and then the spring game. If we just look at that evidence, what do you how do you evaluate the team? What was your takeaway? What are your feelings about the team? Are you encouraged? Are you discouraged? Are you concerned? Are you optimistic? Like how did you take it in?
Well, one, I don't think they gave us enough viewings to get a good enough read on a lot of positions.
Agree.
So
I'm bitter about it.
Yeah. So I would say that's like the one caveat there. Two, I would think that I just think the defense and the front seven, like, more confident in what they're going to do there. And I think Notre Dame's going to be really good in the front seven, like really good. I think they just have like a combination there of the guys on the edge and some really good interior pass rushers that I think the pass rush is going to be really, really special. And obviously they had 40 sacks last year, which was like the most obviously in the last like decade. I think you could see there could be like another 40 sack type of year. Like it could be like that. And possibly even if they don't reach that, but just the pass rush in general and just pressure would be better. I think that the linebacker group, I'm really excited about the linebacker group where I know somebody asked a question and whatever, I guess we'll get to it or whatever, but somebody asked a question on the ISD board about JD Bertrand that we can get into a little bit later. But like when JD Bertrand is kind of like had 101 tackles last year. And I know he had like, obviously he had some missed tackles, but he also obviously played with a bum wrist for most of the season too. But when that guy's kind of like, yeah, I think that guy might not start. When that happens and you have that kind of thing, like that's a pretty good situation, right? Yeah. That's a pretty good situation that Notre Dame's in. And I think front seven, feel great about the front seven. I feel really great about the tackles on offense. I think both those guys are kind of going to be as advertised, as good as advertised. I mean, that Logan Diggs injury, I think, is a blow, but I still think they're going to be pretty loaded in the backfield. And obviously tight end, how can you not feel good about it? And then I think when we're talking about some of the other positions, like quarterback, didn't see enough. Receivers, too many injuries, didn't see enough. Defensive backs, I think you saw some like really exciting stuff from like Brandon Joseph and whatnot, and some heard some good things about like some other guys too. But how much were they tested when the receivers couldn't do that? So to me, it's like you feel good about these certain things, and you have questions about these other things that I think we'll probably get better answers for in August.
So I went into the spring game. I kept telling myself, don't worry about basically anything from the offense because of the way it was set up. And once Buckner went down, it really just hurt, not just like Pine. I think it hurts everybody. I think it hurts the whole unit because then it's like, okay, the whole idea was we're supposed to have two separate teams that are competing against each other. Well, everyone has the same quarterback. And everyone has the same quarterback, and you know it's like, okay, someone got hurt. It's not just that he missed the game, it's that he was hurt. So like no one wants to get hurt, right? So everyone's intensity is therefore just kind of lessened a little bit. And it's like a windy day, and so I was just like, and they don't have a lot of receivers anyway. You don't want to get Mayer hurt See, that's the other part. It's like the most important players on offense are guys that you can't afford to get hurt, right? Like Michael Mayer, Lorenzo Styles, Chris Tyree, guys like that. Like they're not going to give them the ball at all because it's like we don't want anything to happen to them. So you're almost going out of your way not to feature your best player. So that's like, so I went into it. Just don't worry about it. Don't even think about it. Look how guys move around, right? And that's why I was encouraged by Colsey. I thought he moved a lot better than he did last year, right? And Jaden Thomas, same thing, right? Like, hey, he's moving around, making plays. That's good, right? It is difficult then, though. It is still like when you watch it, it's like you're just not impressed, right? And we weren't going to be impressed, and that's why I keep saying to myself, like, don't worry about it. But it is difficult to envision kind of seeing what the offense was in the spring, and then like, okay, now we're ready to go, like beat Ohio State on the road, right? It's hard to see it. It's hard to see kind of everything coming together, but we didn't see the starting quarterback, right? That to me is like the biggest question that I have. Like, does Notre Dame have enough offense? Not just Ohio State, but enough offense to, average over 30 points a game, right? And because you need to do that, right? They're used to scoring.
You got to be close. I mean, really, too, if you want to be like where Notre Dame fans want them to be at, you got to average close to 40,
right,
or more, right? Like that's kind of where you're at, really. Like you got to be like above 35. Like that's kind of where you got to be. Unless you got like the lights out defense too. But even if you have the lights out defense, you're gonna play games. Ohio State this year, do they have that's a team like they're gonna score. I don't care how good Notre Dame's defense is. It would be very surprising if Notre Dame could play great on defense and give up 30.
Yeah.
Right. That's just how much talent they have. So can you score 30 against their defense? Right. And that's what it boils down to. Yeah.
I want to bring up this comment too, because it's a good comment, and it reminded me of something that I wanted to talk about. For the blue and gold game, our defense was competing. I watched some of the Oregon spring game, and the defense wasn't really trying. I feel like they were putting up big numbers to Iowa fans. I didn't watch. You watched a lot of the spring game, so you can comment on that stuff. For me, the defense was competing, and there's one thing that I kept thinking about, and I'm glad this comment came because it reminded me. When you play your teammates in a scrimmage like this, when one thing we can say is we know the offense was not just vanilla, but not game planning to beat the opponent they were going against. Any game Notre Dame plays in, they're always putting in plays that they are putting in specific, just like we can beat this defense with these plays. And you're not doing that in the spring game. Well, not only are you not doing that in the spring game, you're doing your base stuff. And the defense specifically has been practicing against that base stuff for the last 14 practices. Every single one of those guys knows when Notre Dame, when our offense gets into this formation, on this down and this distance, this is what's coming. They know what they're going to do.
Yeah. Like 99% of the time, that's what they
right. The defense knows the play. The offense knows that they know the play, and they know that they don't have a beater for that scheme. And so the offense is in such a poor, to me, it's like the defense better look good because they know all the plays. So the offense is in a poor position. That being said, that's been the case in other spring games before, and plays have been made. This one specifically, when low on receivers.
You know what? To me, it's just different whenever. So if you look at like the previous year's spring game, it was like, well, they wanted to like show that like we can throw a deep. They threw a deep like I don't know how many. They threw a deep none in this game, right? Like
0 times.
Yeah, right. Look how many shots they took to Lawrence Keys in last year, which also that's another example of like Lawrence Keys had like a lot of big plays spring game. Didn't finish, get to the second game.
He is not on the roster.
Yeah, he wasn't on the roster, right? So I would just say that like, one cardinal rule: never overreact to spring game. Never overreact to spring game. Like I would say, like Oregon, I didn't watch Oregon spring game, but I would bet a lot of money that their defense is going to play really hard because Dan Lanning, came from Georgia. Like anyone who watched Georgia's defense saw how freaking hard they played, right? Like they're going to play hard, right? So, and like you said, with some of the stuff with on offense too, like the defense is vanilla too, right? So, it's just I not that it's not encouraging that they, you see guys playing hard. You want to see guys playing hard, but I also think if you look at, say, where Notre Dame is at with their roster currently, the two deep on Notre Dame is deeper on the two deep like now. We're in quality players, guys who could possibly compete for starting jobs now than they have been in many other years. And so, and then the offense was not that. So sometimes it's just like the players are just better and they look faster because they're better than the second string of the offense or whatever.
Yeah. So look, I have concerns, but whatever. I'm not freaking out about it too much. We need to see, Buckner out there, and we need to see all the receivers kind of on the same side. Get Tobias Merriweather in there. Get Avery Davis back. Get everyone healthy. I mean, Matt says they can still bring in a transfer. Where? I don't know where that's coming from.
I'm pretty sure they're going to get somebody. The thing is that nobody knows until they know is how it always looks like. So like perfect example, Chris Smith, right? The Harvard defensive tackle. Nobody knew Notre Dame was like, and no one knew that was because they were like, and he's committed to go to Minnesota. Like he was not even on like that, and it just happened. Right. Yeah. And it was like, literally like, who's that kid at practice? And I was like, I think it's the Harvard. Like that's how it can happen. Yeah. Right. So like, I don't know. Like I've just too many years of this where you just see like, man, I don't even know. All of a sudden it just like, sometimes it's like obvious when they're like Ben Skoranek, Fort Wayne guy, like looking at a thing, Notre Dame could use receiver help, whatever. It's like, well, that makes sense. All of a sudden, boom, there. Jack Cohen didn't take long, right? Like it was just like, boom, that's whatever. But sometimes it just kind of just happens out of nowhere, right? So I think that something will happen there. I would be surprised. And to me, like if they don't get that is what, if we're talking about the offseason, how you grade the offseason, oh man, it changes the grade of the offseason of what is needed. So that it's important to get at least one, hopefully two.
Is there anything that concerns you? What is your concern of yours? Not, maybe not the team. Maybe it's something, I don't know. Anything at all.
Numbers at receiver, 100%. That's just going to be there until that gets addressed and we know for sure. That is 100% a concern, right? Until we see more of Tyler Buckner, and I don't even know. I hope they're going to give us more access in the summer or whatever. Like until we see more of it, and you kind of feel that is going to be a question mark, right? Maybe not a concern, but at least a question mark, right? I think. I mean, kicking game, and I know it's just the spring, and you shouldn't just overreact because it's really, you see one practice. And if you know what, and let's just say they had the day that they had on the other open practice, really good, right? Yeah. Like, I mean, here's a perfect example. John Doerr, horrible in practice. Like, I mean, he was terrible. Everyone who covered Notre Dame thought Notre Dame was in huge trouble after Justyn Rhett graduated. They were like, John Doerr, the guy who was like kicking it out of bounds, like when we're trying to kick a field, like it was ugly. He looked terrible. So you know what? That guy got it right, and he ended up being, I mean, not quite as consistent as Justin Yoon, but he made a lot of big kicks for Notre Dame.
He
was pretty consistent.
He made multiple game winners, made 5 field goals against Clemson in 2020. I mean, nails. You know, like, look, the guy never missed a kick with like the game on the line ever.
No, he didn't.
No.
And I would have bet my mortgage that he would have like blown a bunch of those if you had just watched him practice before. So I don't know, right? Like I don't know. We won't know about the kicking game until whatever. And sometimes too, you go and say Blake Group, who's obviously the transfer, right, from Arkansas State. So say he wins the kicking job out of camp and he's the guy, but he might go 1 for 3 against Ohio State. Well, it might just take like a game or 2 or 3 or whatever to get like all of a sudden Josh Bryan becomes like, that's how it can happen, right? I mean, who knows with kickers when you look at like, say, like in the NFL, Mason Crosby is just one of these guys who's been like in the league forever, seems like he's going to kick forever. Well, he had just like a horrendous year, like 3 years ago, where I was just like, man, this guy's done. And then he was like awesome the next 2 years. It just, you don't know, right? So, I mean, it's a concern. It's a concern, but I think we'll see how it goes in camp. And I also think too, like, this is the one thing when people are like, man, this guy can just like, he's awesome. Like just the consistency of this kicker in practice or this kicker who's kicking at this lower level or whatever, right? Like that guy's awesome, whatever. And then all of a sudden the bright lights come on. And like Blake Group has definitely not kicked in front of 80,000 people before, right? With the game on the line. He hasn't had to do that. So even though he has like more of a track record and coach of kicking in college and being successful, like, like that just, you don't know.
All right. So I'm gonna wrap up here. We're gonna have a final kind of off-season.
Oh wait! Before we do it, because this was asked on IC's board by Clashmore, and I just wanted to bring this up. So, JD Bertrand finished last season with nearly twice as many tackles as anyone else on Andy's defense. He clearly won the trust of Marcus Freeman. Yet some people are now expecting to get passed by 1, if not 2 players in the depth chart next year. Is that realistic, or are the positive qualities that Bertrand brings to the defense being overlooked? One, I think he is being overlooked. And that's a product of partly of
the injury, right?
The injury, yeah. So he didn't really practice this spring, right? So he was there, but he didn't really practice full, right? All spring, and obviously didn't practice in the spring game. So, but in that sense, yeah. And then obviously, everyone remembers the Oklahoma State game, the Fiesta Bowl. I mean, there was literally one drive that it was all on him. Like it was, he missed 3 tackles where it's like he makes one of those and they don't score, and it could like it was costly, right? So, and so people remember the last game. It's like got a bad taste in their mouth, and they think about all the things that kind of like that he's not good at, right? So one, I think is being overlooked, because I wouldn't be surprised if he was the starting Mike and was like a really good 2-down linebacker, like a guy who was like, a very productive guy in terms of like inside run game, and did a lot of great things, right? Like did a lot of just was not, it didn't have to ask to be the overhang player when they went 3 down or anything like that. He wasn't asked to do those kind of things. And all of a sudden, he's not getting exposed in the same ways. So they limit kind of what he's doing, and he's not a 3rd down guy anymore, because they have other guys they like on 3rd down, like Kaiser, Maris, etc., Bo Bauer, etc. Like, so when he doesn't get asked to do those things, all of a sudden he's not the things that he's maybe a liability at, he's not. So that could easily happen. The other thing is Notre Dame's got a lot of talent at linebacker, like I said. And if you told me Junior Tui Halamaka was like game 5, the starting Mike linebacker, I wouldn't be shocked. Like he looks like maybe he could be, right? I don't know. Like we have to wait and kind of see how the offseason goes, right? But it could happen. So I do think that there's like And obviously he's competing with a guy like Bo Bauer, who I think there are other guys with higher upside than Bo Bauer, but it's like, Bo Bauer, what his floor is, and his floor is pretty good.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think he definitely wouldn't be like this dynamic Mike linebacker, but he's really good in the role that he's been asked to do the last couple of years. And maybe he can just continues to do that, and maybe he can't do more, but maybe he can. So you got to wait and see how it plays out.
I think there's a precedence for this too, not just in not under that linebacker, but another position. I remember in 2017, Nick Coleman was the starting free safety, and he look. First of all, I thought for what Nick Coleman is, I thought he played really well in 2017. He wasn't a great playmaker, but he made some plays in some key games, right? Similar to Bertrand, right? Like
really good in that Georgia game.
Great in the Georgia game, like really like made some huge tackles there where it's like they're about to go the distance, tackle for loss on a 3rd and short play. So look, really key player, but limitations there, right? Like you watch him, there's a higher level of play. 2018, Alohi Gilman comes in and he becomes the nickel player, right? So I think I view them the same way. It's like you have a role on the defense. You have a role on the team. You should get snaps. You should play. Like you're good enough for that. As a full-time player, it's just like it's just too much. It's too much to ask. The limitations are too much. You're going to get exposed at some point, right? That's where I think
I think that's a great example.
Right. So I don't know if that's overlooking him or whatever, but I think he has a role in the defense. And I don't know that there's a Mike linebacker on the team right now at this moment, like that is capable of getting all the snaps in every game, right? Maybe that I think Tuihalamaka will grow into that. But beyond that, like I just don't think that person is on the roster. But that's okay. Like you can rotate guys. It's not a big problem. So it's a good question. So thanks for bringing that up. So before we get to this kind of the wrap up, I just wanted to remind everybody who's in the chat or in watching right now or in the chat. If you like what you're hearing today, please hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, so get the notification bell that comes up every time we do a show. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much for tuning in. Jamie, just before we go, just kind of what are you looking for going into fall camp? Like, what do you want to see from the team, Marcus Freeman, any of those things?
I guess the team is you just don't want to hear about guys getting hurt. You just want guys to get healthy going in, and you want to hear like good news about like Jarrett Patterson's injury. Like he's on track, whatever. Like you want to see all that kind of stuff, right? Or like hopefully you get good news about Logan Diggs and like, oh, he might be ready for September or whatnot, right? Like I think that's the kind of thing that you want to hear player wise. Other than that, we're going to hear just little things. I think, you want to hear that some of the guys who weren't early enrollees, and, we always hear a little bit of buzz about those guys when they come in. So like Tobias Merriweather, I mean, that would be great if we heard he's a dude right away. Yeah. Like that would be very significant for Notre Dame. So I think that's something that everybody would like to hear. And I think recruiting wise, I think it's all like, I mean, first of all, I think Notre Dame is going to do pretty well here in the next little bit. I think, they'll probably land some kids in May. And then I think when you look at official visits in June, it's about like closing guys out, the guys who are going to decide before their senior seasons. It's about closing those guys out. It's about getting like, if they could get like Keon Keeley to whatever, and maybe he has already, but he just isn't Sherry or whatever. Like, but a guy like Keon Keeley to be like, I mean, I'm not going anywhere else. So, right. Like that's the kind of thing that would be significant. And that's kind of what but I mean, it kind of goes without saying with like Dante Moore, if they could get him in the fold, that's kind of a big one.
That's the biggest thing, that's Dante Moore, that June 10th is going to be a huge, huge weekend. There's going to be so many people. So, like and subscribe. Appreciate you, man. Appreciate you for all the comments too in the chat. I really appreciate you doing that. Thanks for tuning in today. All right, I think we can wrap it up with that. Thank you again, everybody, for coming in on a Friday, Friday night show. Normally we do this Wednesdays. I could not, as you can notice, I was coughing a little bit. I was sick earlier, so we had to postpone. So I was sick earlier this week, but I feel better now, or at least a little bit. I'm on the mend. So we'll come back next week with another show. Haven't decided on the topic yet. Usually we kind of like to feel the vibe in the air, what people are talking about, and then we go with that. So I appreciate, again, everybody for tuning in. Everyone, go to irishsportsdaily.com, go to the premium section, click on that. Go, you can subscribe to, the site. Go to the message board. Tons of premium content. As always, recruiting is heating up. They just had a great ISD intel piece posted to the board today. It is always good information. It's one of my favorite things that comes out on the site. It's like a lot of great stuff that's collaborative from everybody across the board on the recruiting beat. So Matt and Christian and Mike, and they all come together and they put together a really good post. So go check that out. If you're a member, and if you're not, then subscribe and become a member. We'd love to see you on the board. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Have a good weekend. Happy Mother's Day, and we'll see you all
Happy
next
Mother's
week.
Day to all the moms out there.
Let's go.